Hello and welcome to Cloud Insiders, a podcast that brings cloud down to earth. Hello and welcome to Cloud Insiders. Today we are revisiting the topic of NSX. It would make sense to call the episode something like NSX Revisited, but of course I'll probably go for something a lot less sensible like I'm NSXy too, because, why not? My name is Stuart Robinson and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Joining us today we have Michael Armstrong, Senior Systems Engineer at VMware, and Steve Wood, Senior Consultant at Xtravirt. Hi guys.
Hi Stuart.
Hi Stuart.
Cool. Without further ado, if you could give us a brief introduction of yourselves, let's start with you, Michael.
Yes, so Michael Armstrong, I'm a Senior Systems Engineer at VMware. I've been at VMware for coming up to 4.5 years now. More specifically, I work inside our network and security business unit, and I've been in there for probably about 3.5 years. And my initial focus is technical pre-sales within the UK for NSX. I'm here to assist customers with regards to technical discussions around NSX, but also some of the newer products that the NSBU or the network and security business unit are responsible for. So things like AppDefence, NSX Cloud, and our recent acquisition of an organization called VeloCloud for SD-WAN. And I've previously been a customer, so the majority of my career has been as a customer, and more recently as a systems architect focusing on a transport organization based out of the Northeast.
Cool. And Steve?
So Steve Wood, I'm a Senior Consultant at Xtravirt. I've been working with NSX for the last 3 to 4 years. 2 of those years I worked with Michael at VMware, delivering NSX projects, and more recently at Xtravirt, doing much the same. So focusing on NSX, but also vSphere and SRM and a few other bits and pieces as well.
Cool. So for a discussion in NSX, we are fairly well equipped.
Hopefully.
Well, as our diehard fans will know, about 2 years ago we did our first NSX episode entitled I'm Too NSXy. Since then, NSX has been really widely adopted and everyone in the space knows about NSX and software-defined networking. But can you give us a quick recap on what NSX is?
Yeah, so NSX is really there to reproduce the layer 2 through 7 services, but within software rather than traditionally doing it in hardware. So things like switching, routing, firewalling, some of the load balancing and VPN services. We now have the ability to do that inside software rather than the traditional approach, which was doing it inside the hardware layer. I guess more importantly, a lot of those services now we start actually pushing down into the hypervisor. So things like switching, routing, and firewalling. We now do these services as part of the actual hypervisor kernel. We're completely agnostic from the underlying hardware. So from a physical networking perspective, as long as we can get packets from one host to another host, and we have certain requirements from that network, but we ultimately don't care about the underlying specific hardware vendor. And we typically focus on 3 main use cases, which are automation, security, and application continuity for stretching across multiple sites or multiple virtual centers.
Cool. Well, I think you've covered off a load of stuff there. So, yeah, the current drivers for adoption would pretty much be security, or would you branch it out further than that?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? So a lot of customers will do a phased approach with NSX. So initially they'll look at microsegmentation, and then once NSX is in the business, they're comfortable with the microsegmentation parts, they might start looking at the VXLAN and the overlay technology that NSX brings. And then the other end of it is VMware realized quite early on you can't have a software-defined data center and still rely on physical networks. So that's the kind of missing piece of the puzzle is NSX in that regard. So a lot of customers who are looking to deploy new data centers or doing data center migrations or vSphere upgrades to greenfield kit will look at NSX as a critical part of that project now.
Cool. So Michael, what do you think has been the biggest advancement or improvement in NSX over the last 5 years?
I guess from my perspective, as part of NSX 6.2, we announced cross vCenter networking security. So this is the ability to stretch the networking constructs such as switching and routing in our firewall across multiple vCenters. So from a disaster recovery perspective, or customers are now starting to look at active data centers. this, dramatically simplified the deployments. And it also allowed us to, to overcome some of the scaling issues that we traditionally had with single vCenter environments. So customers who wanted to scale past some of the limits that we had, they had no other option apart from deploying a new environment. Whereas now we can stretch our NSX constructs across, up to 8 vCenters. And I guess more recently with NSX 6.4 is now the application aware distributed firewall. So previously NSX has always been layer 4. So, we can apply our security policies based on ports. Whereas now we can actually identify the application. Typically the first 3 or 4 packets that are processed, we can identify what that application is. So, is it HTTP traffic? Is it HTTPS or is it SSH? And we can now start applying our policies based on the application layer. So one of my rules might be I only want to allow the application SSH on port 22. I don't want to allow it on any other port. So, over the last 5 years, I would probably see, in my eyes, cross vCenter networking security definitely, and we'll see more around the application firewall that was released as part of 6.4.
Cool. And Steve, what's excited you most about NSX in the last 5 years?
So my answer is a bit of a cheat. So for me, it's more around the supporting products that VMware have developed and released. So things like vRealize Network Insight and vRealize Log Insight. So it's given the customers and partners the ability to understand the existing estate. So it's really important when looking at microsegmentation. A lot of customers understand the flows between subnets, between VLANs, between layer 3, but don't necessarily understand the traffic flows within an application, so i.e. on the same subnet within the same VLAN, because traditionally they haven't been able to firewall that traffic. So it's the likes of those products that really help with the adoption of microsegmentation and therefore NSX. For customers, having those tools that lets them deploy NSX and microsegment and secure their network for less time and therefore less money.
Cool. And Michael, you briefly mentioned NSX 6.4. So Steve, what caught your eye in the features list of that?
I've had plenty of meetings with customers over the years, and one of the main use cases that always comes out, and that has always been difficult to deliver, is around the identity firewall. So most customers will have some sort of terminal services farm, whether that's Microsoft RDS or Citrix, and they look at identity firewall and the feature list of NSX over the years, and you would assume that if a user logs into a terminal server, you can do what it says on the tin and segment those network flows to an individual user running inside terminal server farm Citrix. You haven't been able to until NSX 6.4 came out, where now we can actually deliver on that use case. The example being you've got HR users who need to access data on an HR file server. You can firewall that traffic down to an Active Directory user group, so only the HR users can see that file server on the network. So you're not relying on NTFS file permissions, say. So if I'm a finance user, I can't even sing, I can't ping, I can't talk to that HR server. For the likes of terminal services and Citrix, that's a really big use case, especially looking at GPDR and other compliance. Terminal servers has always been a difficult case to sometimes wrap those compliance regulations around. So NSX 6.4 really helps deliver on that.
And it's arrived just in time for GDPR, which is quite handy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So Michael, as someone who talks to a lot of customers during the NSX sales cycle, what are customers asking VMware for?
Yeah, so I obviously, as part of my role at VMware, which is a pre-sales role, I talk to customers, and by far the number one use case and number one driver is still security. But I guess prior to NSX 6.4, the second major use case I was seeing, was around automation. So, customers who are looking to spin up test and development environments, they don't want that manual approach of having to deploy, VLANs or load balancers as part of that application blueprint. But what I'm starting to see now is that sort of shift a little bit. I'm starting to see customers, looking at the disaster recovery side of things, because traditionally disaster recovery has always been something difficult to do with regards to networking. So do I re-IP my workloads, or do I stretch my network across to my secondary data center? But with the multi vCenter support that we've had since 6.2, it makes that a lot simpler. A lot of these publicized security breaches, people are aware of this in the news. Whoever's going to be responsible from a GDPR perspective internally, security is still the number one use case that I see when typically talking to customers.
Cool. And Steve, would you agree with that?
For me, I've delivered more microsegmentation work, and I think that's because generally the sales cycle is slightly longer on a full NSX deployment. And by full NSX deployment, I mean deploying VXLAN, load balancing, some of the other use cases that NSX can deliver alongside microsegmentation. That's generally because most customers implement NSX at the point of, okay, we need to move data centers. So they spin up a new greenfield data center. NSX is the perfect enabler to not only move them into that data center, but to deliver on the SDDC model in the new build. So generally, there hasn't been as many of those for me. Certainly delivered them, but certainly a lot more microsegmentation. So constantly in meetings with customers who want to deliver microsegmentation, especially with what's gone on in the press over the last few years. Cybersecurity has become a number one priority now for businesses. I think it fell by the wayside previously, so NSX again helps deliver on that.
Cool. This is going to be a tricky one for me to read because I keep reading this as RNLI, so I have no idea what lifeboats have got to do with this. But let's start from the beginning. VRNI, vRealized Network Insight, along with the launch of VMware's AppDefence, shows VMware is really asserting themselves as the company you need to talk to about securing your SDDC. Can you explain a bit about what AppDefence is and how NSX can work with it to secure your data center?
Yeah, so AppDefence is one of our new offerings that's available in the US. It should be coming to the UK shortly. And it's all about learning the actual intended state of the application or how that application should run. So imagine deploying a new application. What we can do as part of AppDefence and as part of the actual hypervisor is we can actually learn that application. So by that, I mean, we'll typically monitor it for between 2 or 4 weeks. And by that, we're basically learning things like any inbound connections. So, are there any connections coming into the application? Over what port are they coming in from? From what IP address are they coming in from? Things like outbound connections. Where does this application server need to talk to? Does it need to talk to a backend database server on what port or what IP address? We also learn all of the processes that are running inside that guest OS. So, does the application use Java? What version of Java does it run? Does it use PowerShell? Is it using Python? All of these sorts of services, we learn this intended state of how this application should run. What we then do is we store that information inside like a secure enclave, inside a secure portion of the hypervisor, and we just continue to enforce that. So we look at the application running. Is it running according to this? Think of it as a birth certificate. Is it running according to this birth certificate? If so, then that's absolutely fine. But if there's any deviation from that, so imagine a rogue process starting up inside the application or inside the actual virtual machine that's then trying to make connections to other workloads inside your network, then do something. Okay, so it might be simple as just alert me, just tell me that this process has started up and it's trying to communicate outside of its known good state. Or if we've got NSX, we can effectively tag that virtual machine. So by tag, I just mean a bit of metadata. I can tag that virtual machine, and then NSX can take some action, which might be to basically disconnect that virtual machine from the network, or maybe only allow connections from a secure management network or something like that. So AppDefence is really about understanding how the application works and enforcing that, but then it can also integrate with NSX from an isolation and security point of view.
Perfect. So basically moving from reactive to proactive security, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. And things like upgrades, it understands when you've done an upgrade that you've upgraded a particular application. Yeah, you'll see a lot more coming out with regards to AppDefence over the coming months, especially in the UK.
Cool. And Steve, is this something that's floating your boat at the moment?
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't know too much about it until I had a look at Michael's blog, where he's actually drawn out a 3-part series on how to install it, how to configure it, and how it works. So I really recommend people go and check that out. So for those that don't know Michael's blog, it's 80arm.co.uk. Go and have a look. And Michael, I'm assuming the check's in the post for that link.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the free promotion there, Steve.
Cool. So if I aim this one at you then, Michael, can you explain what NSX Cloud is?
Yes. So NSX Cloud is our SaaS-based offering, so software as a service. So this is going to be delivered and managed completely by VMware. And it's a whole bunch of cloud services, one of which is obviously NSX Cloud. And the idea with this is that, VMware will manage the environment for you. So, we'll manage the controllers and the NSX managers. We'll manage the upgrade process. If there are any issues, then obviously, contact VMware. We'll resolve those issues. But the idea with this is that we can now start using this to protect native workloads inside currently AWS. So customers have got a cloud strategy, whether it's hybrid cloud, whether they're planning on moving everything into public clouds. They are consuming cloud services, typically by developers, and developers might not necessarily have the security hat on all the time. So when they're deploying these EC2 instances inside AWS, how are we ensuring, or how is the internal security department ensuring that these services are protected? So with NSX Cloud, we have the unique ability to employ or deploy our security services inside native EC2 instances, so inside workloads running natively inside AWS. So we can manage the security policy on-prem. As a developer deploys his workload inside AWS, you might tag that workload with a web server tag, and by that nature of that tag being applied, we can then push down the correct security policies inside that guest for that virtual machine, for that workload. So it's all around protecting, these native cloud instances, and we should be moving on to public clouds, further later on this year.
Yeah. So Steve, we've covered off workloads a little bit there. How does NSX help to protect workloads running on VMware Cloud on AWS?
So, as Michael said, NSX is deployed for you inside VMware Cloud on AWS. It's a very different look and feel to what on-premise customers are familiar with, because it's all HTML5 UI, and it delivers much of the same functionality as the on-premise version of NSX-V, so logical switching, VPNs. I believe in the future you will be able to do microsegmentation, but for the time being, it's very similar feature set as to what you get on premise.
Cool. And so, Michael, what is NSX-T and how does it differ from NSX-V? Good
question. So NSX, we have two versions of NSX. We have NSX-V for vSphere workloads, and we have NSX-T, which is our multi-hypervisor, multi-cloud networking security platform. So NSX-T is not feature comparison with NSX-V yet, and we only typically focus on particular use cases. So by that I mean, if customers have a use case for deploying a developer cloud environment and they want to maybe use something like OpenStack as the cloud management platform, then NSX-T would be the recommended product for that. If customers are looking at containers, okay, so using the likes of Docker or Kubernetes as the orchestration platform, but they want to protect traffic between individual containers, then NSX-T would once again be a typical use case for that. But for the majority of customers who are looking at things like micro-segmentation, they maybe want to take advantage of the layer 7 capabilities of NSX 6.4, then it would still be, we'd recommend the NSX-V route for that. So NSX-T, the two products will merge eventually, so it'll be one product. But at the moment, NSX-V is by far the feature-rich. Unless you have specific use cases, then typically NSX-T would be the route for those additional use cases.
Cool. So this all sounds very exciting. So Steve, have you got anything you'd like to add to it?
Yeah, so I think Nicira was a large contributor to OpenStack previously. So NSX-T aligns historically with, I guess, more the original Nicira product. VMware have been working very hard behind the scenes, as Michael said, to kind of amalgamate the two products. I believe, and it's kind of a question for Michael, right? There's no dependency on the VDS in NSX-T. Is that right, Michael?
That is correct. Yes. So NSX-T has its own vSwitch. So when you deploy NSX-T, as part of that, you migrate workloads from VLAN-backed networks onto the new VDS, or the new vSwitch that comes as part of NSX-T. We also don't have a dependency on vCenter. So in order to have this multi-hypervisor strategy, whereby we can support workloads not only on ESXi but also on KVM, we needed to effectively decouple ourselves from vCenter. So NSX-T doesn't have a requirement for vCenter, because obviously with KVM we wouldn't be using vCenter anyway.
Cool. So organizations are really starting to evolve their IT with things such as cloud-native applications, containers and Kubernetes in mind. How does NSX or NSX-T help there, if we haven't covered it off already in too much detail?
Yeah, so as I mentioned previously, NSX-T, if the use case is containers, and you're looking at Kubernetes as being the orchestration platform for those containers, then NSX-T is absolutely the correct route to be going down. We take advantage of what we call the NCP, which is the NSX container plugin. And this comes obviously as part of NSX-T, and this is what provides effectively the integration between NSX-T and whatever you choose as your container orchestration platform. So in this case, Kubernetes, for example. And the plugin basically integrates with NSX Manager. It integrates with the Kubernetes control plane. And then it's used to basically monitor any changes to the container that maybe Kubernetes is making, whether it's spinning up or spinning down those containers. And then it also, pulls in those resource information from NSX, so such as things like, logical ports that container is connected to, any switches, any changes to any security groups. So it basically there to marry those two together, and that's what forms that integration between the networking security side of things and effectively our containers.
Cool. Steve, have you got anything to add to that?
I guess the only thing I'd add it from an IT perspective, it gives IT visibility and control of all microservices-based and traditional applications, because it can be deployed on the same overlay. So from an IT perspective, you've got that visibility now across the entire estate. DevOps aren't just in the corner away from everyone else. You've got visibility.
Cool. Okay, so if I come back to you, Steve, if I'm considering implementing an NSX solution, what questions do I need to be asking as part of my planning process, and what are the key steps to successful implementation?
Okay, so kind of bread and butter stuff for us, right? So workshops, design workshops, and use case capture, standard stuff. Yeah, it's an integral part of any project, right? You've got to do the use case definition, the requirements capture up front. From a technical aspect, NSX, it only needs an IP network and an MTU of 1600 or greater. However, it's never as simple as that. There's a lot to consider. Different consultants will tackle the NSX design from very different angles. So if the more network background, they'll generally go top down, whereas if the more in the past had an infrastructure focus, they tend to work from the bottom up. There's no real right or wrong way. I tend to work from a more bottom-up approach because historically I've been more infrastructure focused. Mm-hmm. The reason why that's important is we're layering NSX on top of vSphere, and in some cases an existing vSphere implementation. So we need to make sure that the NSX implementation is going to align itself correctly, and by that I mean in terms of existing cluster layout, in terms of the layer 2, layer 3 boundaries in a network design. That's going to dictate how we IP address the VM kernel interfaces on the host, and therefore the VTEPs. So we really need to revisit the vSphere design. Sometimes we need to make changes to that to get the best out of the NSX design. These are the type of questions we cover in the design workshops. The next big one, I guess, is knowing your applications. And I've walked into loads of meetings with customers and asked the question, okay, can you tell me your flows and your application architecture and dependencies for this application? And 99.5% of the time, they can't, because they just don't know. So it's the likes of Network Insight, or vRealize Network Insight, I'll get wrong if I say Network Insight, and Log Insight. It's using those products to help the customer understand those flows. So, when we say, can you give us the application architecture, dependencies, and the flows for these apps? Because we need to go and create a load of microsegmentation rules around it. They go, well, I don't know that. As part of the work, as part of the work effort, we'll help the customer to understand those flows. And then I guess lastly, KISS, keep it simple. NSX has got loads of great features, but it doesn't mean you need to go and use them all and find a use case that doesn't really exist. NSX is a complicated beast, so I'd really encourage people, stick with the basics, keep it simple, really go back to use case capture at the start, and are you satisfying the use cases really, and are you doing it in sometimes the simplest way possible? It doesn't need to be overly complicated just because you can. I guess that's the key take home here, right? You can do what you want to do in NSX, and you can do it really simple, or NSX can really cater for some of those more complicated use cases. But just understand that from the start.
Yeah, so essentially it's know your hypervisor, know your apps that you're going to be using, and then keep it simple. You don't need to throw everything at it, just what you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael, anything you'd add to that?
So Steve's got by far more post-sales implementation experience than I have. But the use cases is definitely key. Identify those use cases, implement based on those use cases, based on customer feedback, issues that I see customers have. It typically always boils down to incorrect firewall rules. So customers don't understand the application flows because it's something that we've traditionally never really had to worry about. Yeah, if I've got an application, a web server, an app server, and a database server sitting in the same VLAN, I've never really had to worry about making sure that I allow traffic from my web server to my app server, and then from my app server to my database server. Yeah, we've never had to traditionally worry about that because we've always done the security on the perimeter. So yeah, absolutely understand the application flows, and also things like training. So there's a wealth of blogs out there. There's paid for training. There's even things like the VMware hands-on labs, whereby customers can get their hands-on in a safe, isolated environment with products like NSX and NSX-T. Do a bit of internal training. Train all staff, attend courses. If you do decide to go down the PSO route, then spend time with the likes of Steve. Sit next to Steve, ask him questions, ask him why he's doing certain things. You're going to be running it at the end of the day, so understand exactly how this product works. And I guess just finally as well to say is things like upgrade guides. Yeah, so we've had issues with customers who went from an unsupported upgrade. So before you do things like upgrades, just do your due diligence. Make sure the documentation is correct. Make sure you're going to a supported version. There's no KB articles referencing any potential issues before you just dive straight in and actually do the upgrade.
Cool. So for the last 5 years, each year has been the year of VDI. Is 2018 the year of hybrid cloud, and is NSX going some way to helping businesses achieve that?
I'll jump in here with regards to so VMware and AWS. I personally see is going to go a long way to help customers transition to the cloud, and depending on how customers are potentially looking at this, because moving from on-prem to public cloud is quite difficult. Yeah, you've got to take into consideration differences of hypervisors. So if you say going from a vSphere environment, maybe you're starting to look to go into AWS, you're effectively going from the underlying hypervisor being vSphere to the underlying hypervisor inside AWS being either Xen or KVM, depending on how the migration is going. So you need to take into consideration things like the application, how that's going to handle the OS, because the underlying hardware is going to change. With VMware and AWS, because we're using bare metal services or bare metal hardware inside AWS to deploy the VMware software stack, so ESXi, vSAN, NSX, ultimately the underlying hypervisor doesn't change. Yeah, we're just moving from a vSphere environment on-prem to a vSphere environment running inside AWS. So for the likes of CEOs or CTOs who've got that mandate to start moving services into public cloud, it's by far the easiest option for them. They just procure the service. They then have the ability to migrate their workloads from on-prem into public cloud, in this case AWS, and effectively tick that box to say they're starting to do that transition. Out of all of the products, I see VMware and AWS as being the key driver to hopefully 2018 being the year of hybrid cloud and not VDI for once.
Awesome. And Steve, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think NSX is a key enabler here, right? So a lot of organizations, or most organizations, want bring your own IP. They want to be able to transition workloads between clouds or from on-premise to a public cloud, and they don't want to re-architect that application, right? They don't want to re-IP it. So the likes of NSX and Layer 2 VPN, that's a very easy model to deploy, stretch those Layer 2 segments into the cloud, so you can do your migrations from on-premise to public cloud and then back again without disrupting the app and services.
Cool. So Steve, if we stick with you and then we'll let Michael jump in, where is the future heading for NSX?
So I would like to think, we'd have NS-T and NSX-V aligned and possibly merge. I know something's been talked around for a long time now. I would like to see those two product sets merged. And I think from a cloud perspective, I think customers are just going to expect whatever cloud, whether it's Azure, AWS, to be NSX aware or NSX enabled. If a large percentage of the on-premise workloads run on VMware, so it makes sense for these public cloud providers to at least support some of VMware's product stack. So the likes of NSX be able to stretch networks between clouds and on-premise. They're going to need to adopt that technology, and I think NSX is going to play a big part in that.
Cool. And Michael?
So I guess this is where I get my disclaimer in place. I'm not a product manager. Whatever I say might or might not make it into future versions of the product. I'm just getting that out of the way now. So I guess where I see this going, and obviously I'm uniquely placed inside the NSBU. So obviously the focus on multi-hypervisor. So obviously we have the NSXi KVM, Azure Stack potentially down the line, and multi-cloud. Once again, we currently support AWS from a VMware and AWS or from an NSX Cloud perspective. Azure, potentially Google Compute coming further on down the line. I think you're going to see a lot more services moving a lot more applications moving into a SaaS model. So a lot of our products starting to move to a more consumer model. So customers can pay for these services over 1 or 3 years, and I think you'll start seeing the development of all that increase. And by that I mean future features getting integrated into the SaaS offering a lot quicker than the on-prem versions, just purely because they can make the changes on the back end, have them tested, and then have them available for customers in like a 6-month cadence. So I think you're going to start seeing a bigger push to SaaS-based modeling. You'll see things like AppDefence coming online this year, and then more regions and more functionality inside the whole VMware and AWS offering as well. So it's an interesting time inside the NSBU. There's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of acquisitions taking place. And I think you'll just start seeing all of those acquisitions all come together and have a product with all those solutions that hopefully solves all of the customers' needs. So that was my sort of view on where we're going with NSX and hopefully what you'll see over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and what a privileged view it is. Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. Is there anything else either of you'd like to add?
I guess from my perspective, as I mentioned, there's a lot of information out there. Reach out to your VMware account manager or your SE who's aligned to your account if you want more information on these things. There's a lot of great blog articles out there, not only on NSX, but things like VMware and AWS, NSX Cloud, AppDefence. As I mentioned previously as well, the hands-on labs, absolutely brilliant resources, free to consume. Spin up as many labs as you want, take the labs as many times as you want, play with products that you're potentially not familiar with. And then, as I said, when you reach out to your account managers, ask them about any events that are taking place. I know the VMC and AWS guys are starting to do a lot more workshops whereby you can get your hands on this. We do free NSX workshops where we demo and whiteboard and give you access to environments. So reach out to your VMware team and start asking for some of these services.
Cool, that's great. Mike, if people want to get hold of you, have you got a Twitter handle or a blog people can come to you with?
Yes, so feel free to reach out. My Twitter handle is @M80ARM, so Mike 80 Alpha Romeo Mike. Don't ask why that is. And my website is exactly the same, so www.m80arm.co.uk.
And Steve, if people want to get in contact with you?
Yes, @surfing_clouds. you can get me on Twitter. And I've got a blog as well. I might as well push that. So it's vwood, but wud.net. So vwud.net. And Michael, I thought there was some interesting story behind the M80 arm. I'm disappointed to hear there's not.
There is. So my car number plate is actually M80ARM. I was getting sick of having to identify different usernames every time I was registering for websites. So I always found that my number plate was obviously never taken. But now, whenever I drive as cautiously as I can, because in the event of potentially cutting somebody up or sticking my fingers up at anybody, they decide to Google that number plate, they can pretty much find out a wealth of information about me. So, yeah.
Cool. And if anyone wants to follow me, I am at CI_Stu on Twitter. Well, thanks very much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cloud Insiders. To find out more and to listen to additional episodes, go to cloudinsiders.fm. You can follow us on Twitter at Cloud Insiders.